You think you know Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, the brilliant mind who gave us concepts like the unconscious, the shadow, archetypes, but still shape how we understand human nature today. But what if I told you that Jung's most profound discovery, the one that would revolutionize how we see human development, didn't come from years of academic study, from analyzing patients, or from reading ancient texts? What if it came from a complete psychological breakdown that nearly destroyed him? Picture this. It's 1913. Jung is 38 years old, at the height of his career. He's Freud's chosen successor, the golden boy of psychoanalysis. He has a thriving practice, a beautiful family, international recognition. By every external measure, he has arrived. And then, without warning, his world begins to collapse from the inside. It starts with dreams, vivid, disturbing visions of Europe drowning in blood. Then come the fantasies during his waking hours, conversations with figures that don't exist, images that seem to rise from some deep, forgotten well within his psyche. He begins to question his own sanity. Jung later wrote, "An incessant stream of fantasies had been released, and I did my best not to lose my head, but to find some way to understand these strange things." For 6 years, Jung lived in what he called a confrontation with the unconscious. His colleagues whispered behind closed doors. Some thought he was having a nervous breakdown. Others wondered if he had lost his mind entirely. But Jung did something extraordinary. Instead of running from the chaos, instead of medicating it away or pretending it wasn't happening, he decided to dive deeper. He began documenting everything. Every vision, every conversation with these inner figures, every strange symbol that emerged from his unconscious mind. What emerged from this process was a blood-red leather journal that he would later call the Red Book. Hundreds of pages of visions, dialogues, and illustrations that mapped the geography of his own inner world. And in that geography, Jung discovered something that would change everything we thought we knew about human development. He discovered that what we call midlife crisis, this psychological upheaval that hits so many of us around the age of 40, isn't a breakdown at all. It's a breakthrough. It's the moment when your soul stops accepting the life you built to please others and demands that you finally become who you really are. But here's what makes Jung's story so compelling. He didn't just survive his crisis. He emerged from it more creative, more insightful, more authentically himself than he had ever been before. The theories that made him famous, individuation, the collective unconscious, the process of becoming whole, all of them were born in that darkness. Jung would later write, "The years when I was pursuing my inner images were the most important in my life. In them, everything essential was decided." Think about that for a moment. This man, who would become one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century, said that his years of psychological crisis were the most important of his life. Not his years of success, not his years of recognition, but his years of falling apart. Because Jung discovered something that our achievement-obsessed culture doesn't want you to know, that the first half of life is just preparation. It's research. It's the building of a necessary, but ultimately insufficient identity. The real work, the work of becoming who you truly are, doesn't begin until that identity starts to crack. And it usually starts to crack around the age of 40. Now, you might be thinking, but I'm not a famous psychologist. I don't have time for a 6-year psychological journey. I have responsibilities, bills to pay, people depending on me. And you're right. You are not Jung, but you are human. And the same psychological forces that drove Jung into his crisis are operating in your life right now, whether you're aware of them or not. That restlessness you feel, that sense that something is missing even though your life looks successful from the outside. That quiet voice asking, "Is this all there is?" That growing feeling that you're playing a role instead of living a life. Jung called this the beginning of what he termed the afternoon of life. And he believed that trying to live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning is not just ineffective, it's psychologically destructive. Today, you're going to discover what Jung learned in his darkest hour. You'll understand why he called his psychological crisis the most essential experience of his life. And you'll learn how his personal journey through what looked like madness became a roadmap for human transformation that's as relevant today as it was a century ago. Because if Jung was right, and his own transformation proved he was, then everything you've been told about aging, about playing it safe, about your best years being behind you, about the inevitability of decline, is not just wrong, it's backwards. And the evidence isn't just theoretical. It's written in Jung's own life, in his own words, in the pages of the Red Book that he kept hidden for nearly a century. So, let me ask you something. Are you ready to stop running from your own transformation? Are you ready to discover why the breakdown might actually be the breakthrough you've been waiting for your entire life? Because Jung's journey into the depths of his own psyche revealed something profound, that the crisis isn't the problem. The crisis is the cure. What Jung discovered in his crisis years would fundamentally challenge how we think about human development. But to understand his breakthrough, we need to understand what he saw that everyone else missed. Picture the conventional view of life that dominated Jung's era, and still dominates ours today. We're told that life follows a simple arc. You grow up, you achieve, you peak somewhere in your 20s or 30s, and then it's all downhill from there. Youth equals potential. Age equals decline. Simple. Jung looked at this model and realized it was not just incomplete, it was psychologically destructive. During his years of inner exploration, Jung began to see human life differently. He started to understand that we don't live one life. We live two completely different lives, with completely different purposes, requiring completely different approaches. He called these the morning and afternoon of life. In one of his most profound insights, Jung wrote, "Thoroughly unprepared, we take the step into the afternoon of life. Worse still, we take this step with the false presupposition that our truths and our ideals will serve us as hitherto. But we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. For what was great in the morning will be little at evening, and what in the morning was true at evening will have become a lie." Let that sink in for a moment. Jung is saying that the strategies, values, and identities that worked in the first half of life not only stop working in the second half, they become actively harmful. But why? What changes at this mysterious threshold that Jung placed around the age of 40? To understand this, Jung looked at what the morning of life is actually for, and what he saw was this. The first 40 years of life are about adaptation. They're about building what he called the persona, the mask we wear to function in society. Think about your own first 40 years. What were you doing? You were learning how to survive in the world, how to get along with others, how to be productive, acceptable, successful by external standards. You were building a career, establishing relationships, accumulating possessions, creating a reputation. You were, in Jung's terms, strengthening your ego, that part of the psyche that helps you navigate the external world. And this is necessary work. Jung never dismissed the importance of the morning of life. Without a strong ego, without the ability to function in society, without the persona that helps us relate to others, we cannot survive. But here's what Jung realized during his crisis. The persona is not the self. The ego is not the totality of who you are. They are tools, necessary tools, but they are not your essence. Jung discovered this in the most visceral way possible. Here was a man who had built the perfect persona, successful psychiatrist, respected intellectual, devoted family man. His ego was strong, his reputation solid, his external life enviable. And yet, something inside him was dying. During his darkest moments, Jung began to understand that the very structures that had brought him success in the morning of life were now suffocating the deeper parts of himself that wanted to emerge. He wrote in his private notes, "I had to abandon the idea of the superordinate position of the ego. I had to accept that what I had previously called my ego was only a fragment and expression of something far more comprehensive, something I could not grasp with my mind. This something far more comprehensive is what Jung came to call the self, with a capital S. Not the ego self that adapts to the world, but the deeper self that contains your unique essence, your unrealized potential, your authentic nature. And here's Jung's revolutionary insight. This deeper self cannot emerge while you're still completely identified with your persona. It cannot grow while you're still living according to the program of life's morning. Something has to break down for something new to break through. This is why Jung came to see the midlife crisis not as a pathology, but as a natural and necessary transition. It's the moment when your psyche begins to shift its priorities from external adaptation to internal realization. Jung observed this pattern not just in his own life, but in his patients. He began to notice that people who came to see him in their 40s and 50s were dealing with a completely different set of psychological challenges than younger patients. Younger patients typically struggled with what Jung called problems of adaptation: how to fit into society, how to succeed, how to build relationships, how to establish themselves in the world. But older patients presented what he called problems of meaning. They would say things like, "I have everything I thought I wanted, but I feel empty. I followed the rules, but something is missing. I don't recognize myself anymore." These weren't problems that could be solved by more adaptation, more success, more external achievement. These were problems of the soul. Jung began to realize that what we call depression, anxiety, or crisis in midlife is often the psyche's way of saying, "The morning program is no longer sufficient. It's time for something new." But here's where most people, then and now, make a crucial mistake. When they feel this inner stirring, this dissatisfaction with their current life, they try to solve it using morning of life strategies. They work harder, they chase new achievements, they buy things, they change external circumstances, while leaving their internal world untouched. Jung called this approach not only ineffective, but psychologically dangerous. It's like trying to use a child's clothes on an adult body. Not only will they not fit, but they'll restrict your movement and growth. So what is the afternoon of life actually for? What should you be doing once you've built your ego, established your persona, proven you can function in the world? Jung's answer was radical. The afternoon of life is for individuation. Individuation, Jung's most important concept, is the process of becoming who you truly are, as opposed to who you've been conditioned to be. It's about integrating all the parts of yourself that you had to suppress or ignore in order to build your persona. It's about moving from adaptation to authenticity. Jung defined individuation as becoming an individual, and insofar as individuality embraces our innermost, last, and incomparable uniqueness, it also implies becoming one's own self. Notice that word, incomparable. Jung believed that true individuation leads you to become something that cannot be compared to anyone else, because you become authentically, uniquely yourself. But this process cannot begin until you're willing to question the persona you've built, to examine the life you've constructed, to ask whether the path you're on is truly your path, or simply the path you were given. And that questioning, that's what triggers what we call the midlife crisis. Jung realized that this crisis isn't something to be avoided or quickly resolved. It's something to be honored, explored, and ultimately embraced as the doorway to the most important phase of human development. Because in Jung's view, the afternoon of life isn't about decline. It's about depth. It's not about having less. It's about becoming more authentic, more integrated, more truly yourself than you have ever been before. But this transformation requires something that our culture finds terrifying: the willingness to let go of who you've been in order to discover who you really are. So what exactly is this individuation process that Jung discovered during his years in the psychological wilderness? How do you actually move from living someone else's program to living your own authentic life? Jung didn't just theorize about this process. He lived it, documented it, and developed specific techniques that he used both on himself and with his patients. What emerged was a map of psychological transformation, unlike anything the world had seen before. During his crisis years, Jung made a discovery that would become central to all his later work. The parts of ourselves that we reject, deny, or hide don't disappear. They go into what he called the shadow, and they wait. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." Think about your own life for a moment. In building your persona, that socially acceptable version of yourself, what did you have to leave behind? What aspects of your personality did you learn were inappropriate or unacceptable? Maybe you learned that anger wasn't allowed, so you became perpetually pleasant. Maybe you discovered that vulnerability was dangerous, so you became invulnerable. Maybe you were told that certain dreams were impractical, so you became practical instead. All of those rejected parts, the anger, the vulnerability, the impractical dreams, they didn't vanish. They went into your shadow. And Jung discovered that you cannot become whole until you reclaim them. But here's what made Jung's approach revolutionary. He didn't see shadow work as getting rid of negative traits. He saw it as integration, finding healthy ways to express the full spectrum of human nature that lives within you. During his own crisis, Jung experienced this integration firsthand. He had built his persona around being rational, controlled, scientifically minded. But in his visions and active imagination work, he encountered parts of himself that were mystical, emotional, even chaotic. Instead of dismissing these experiences as symptoms of breakdown, Jung began to dialogue with them. He developed what he called active imagination, a technique for consciously engaging with unconscious content. Here's how Jung described his own process. "I took the unconscious contents that came up and submitted them to a directed conscious consideration. I would ask myself, what does this mean? How ought I to deal with this? And I would answer this question to the figure that had appeared to me." This wasn't passive fantasy or daydreaming. This was active, intentional engagement with the parts of himself he had never allowed into consciousness. Jung would have conversations with inner figures, ask them questions, listen to their responses, and gradually integrate their wisdom into his conscious understanding. One of the most significant figures Jung encountered during this process was an inner wise man he called Philemon. Jung described Philemon as having a definite personality and said that conversations with this figure taught him crucial insights about the nature of the psyche. Jung wrote, "Philemon represented a force which was not myself. In my fantasies I held conversations with him, and he said things which I had not consciously thought, for I observed clearly that it was he who spoke, not I." Now, you might be thinking this sounds like Jung was losing touch with reality. But here's what's remarkable. This process of engaging with his unconscious through active imagination didn't make Jung more disconnected from the real world. It made him more integrated, more creative, and ultimately more effective in his work and relationships. The techniques Jung developed during his crisis became tools he would use for the rest of his life and teach to countless patients. And they all served the same fundamental purpose: to help people integrate the rejected parts of themselves into a more complete, authentic whole. But shadow integration is just the beginning of what Jung called the individuation process. As you reclaim the parts of yourself you've hidden, you begin to encounter what Jung called the contrasexual element. The anima in men, the animus in women. Jung discovered that within every person exists not just their conscious gender identity, but also the unconscious qualities traditionally associated with the opposite gender. For men, this inner feminine, anima, often carries qualities like receptivity, intuition, emotional depth. For women, this inner masculine, animus, might carry qualities like assertiveness, logical thinking, independence. During the morning of life, we often over-identify with one side while suppressing the other. Men learn to be strong and suppress vulnerability. Women learn to be nurturing and suppress ambition. But Jung realized that wholeness requires integrating both aspects. In his own life, Jung's encounter with his anima opened him to mystical experiences, artistic expression, and emotional depths that his rational persona had previously rejected. This integration didn't make him less masculine, it made him more complete. But even shadow integration and anima animus work are still not the final destination of individuation. Jung discovered that there's something even deeper, what he called the self, with a capital S. The self, in Jung's understanding, is not the ego. It's not even the sum of all your psychological parts. It's something transcendent, the organizing principle of the entire psyche, the blueprint of your unique potential, the deeper wisdom that knows who you're meant to become. Jung often represented the self through mandala symbols, circular, symmetrical patterns that suggested wholeness and integration. During his crisis years, Jung found himself spontaneously drawing mandalas, and he began to understand them as representations of the self trying to manifest in consciousness. He wrote, "The mandala is an archetypal image whose occurrence is attested throughout the ages. It signifies the wholeness of the self. But here is what's crucial to understand. You cannot reach the self by trying to perfect your ego or by building a better persona. You can only reach it by going through the difficult work of integration, embracing your shadow, dialoguing with your contrasexual side, and allowing a deeper organizing principle to emerge." Jung called this emergence the transcendent function, the mysterious process by which conscious and unconscious contents unite to create something new, something that transcends the limitations of either alone. This is why Jung saw midlife not as decline, but as opportunity. It's the time when you've built enough ego strength to survive the dismantling process. It's when you've lived enough to have substantial shadow material to integrate. It's when you've followed the persona far enough to discover its limitations. In other words, you cannot individuate until you have something to individuate from. Jung observed that people who try to skip the morning of life, who reject all social adaptation, who refuse to build a functional ego, often remain psychologically adolescent. But people who get stuck in the morning of life, who never question their persona, who never explore their shadow, remain psychologically incomplete. The afternoon of life requires both the ego strength developed in the morning and the willingness to transcend that ego in service of something larger. This is why Jung came to see his own psychological crisis not as a breakdown, but as a breaking open. It was the moment when his ego's limitations became so apparent that deeper forces could finally emerge. And those deeper forces didn't just give him psychological relief, they gave him his life's work. The concepts of individuation, the collective unconscious, archetypal psychology, all of Jung's major contributions to human understanding emerged from his willingness to engage with his own unconscious during those crisis years. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." But he also discovered that it's the most liberating thing as well. Because when you stop trying to be who others expect you to be and start becoming who you actually are, you tap into a source of energy and creativity that you never knew existed. This is the promise of Jung's individuation process. Not that life becomes easier, but that it becomes real. Not that you become perfect, but that you become whole. Not that you escape human suffering, but that you find meaning in it. And according to Jung, this transformation is not just possible in midlife, it's the very purpose of midlife. The afternoon of life exists to complete what the morning began, the full realization of human potential. So, how do you actually begin this process? How do you move from understanding Jung's insights intellectually to living them authentically? How do you start your own journey into the afternoon of life? Jung didn't leave us with abstract theories. During his crisis years and throughout his practice, he developed specific practical methods for engaging with the unconscious and facilitating individuation. These aren't New Age techniques or modern self-help strategies. These are the actual methods Jung used on himself and taught to his patients for over 50 years. But before we dive into the practical work, you need to understand something crucial. Jung discovered that you cannot force individuation. You cannot rush it, manipulate it, or achieve it to willpower alone. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also understood that this becoming is a process, not an event. It requires what he called holding the tension, staying present with uncomfortable psychological states long enough for something new to emerge. This is perhaps the hardest part for people in our instant gratification culture to accept. We want to fix the midlife crisis, solve it, get through it as quickly as possible. But Jung discovered that the crisis itself is the medicine. The breakdown is the breakthrough. So the first step in Jung's approach is not action. It's acceptance. Accepting that if you're feeling restless, lost, or disillusioned with your current life, something important is trying to happen. Your psyche is attempting to initiate you into the afternoon of life. Jung observed that this initiation often begins with what he called the call of the soul. It might manifest as a growing sense that your current life, while successful on paper, doesn't feel authentic or meaningful. Dreams that feel more vivid or significant than usual. A pull toward activities, interests, or aspects of life that you've previously ignored or dismissed. Increasing sensitivity to beauty, meaning, or spiritual questions. A feeling that you're playing a role rather than living your true life. If you recognize any of these experiences, Jung would say you're already in the early stages of individuation. The question is, will you listen to what your psyche is trying to tell you, or will you try to silence it with more external achievements? Jung's first practical technique was what he called active imagination. This is not passive daydreaming or wishful thinking. It's a specific method for engaging consciously with unconscious content. Here's how Jung described the process. First, you empty your mind of conscious thoughts and allow unconscious content to arise naturally. Then, instead of dismissing or analyzing what emerges, you give it form through writing, drawing, or inner dialogue. Finally, you take an ethical standpoint toward what emerges, asking what it means and how you should respond to it. Jung used this technique throughout his crisis years. He would sit quietly, allow images or figures to arise in his imagination, and then engage with them as if they were real people with their own thoughts and perspectives. This is how he encountered Philemon and other inner figures who guided his transformation. You can begin this practice simply. Set aside time for solitude. Jung believed this was absolutely essential. In our connected, busy world, we rarely give the unconscious space to speak. Create regular periods where you're not consuming information, not being productive, not solving problems, just being present with whatever arises. When thoughts, images, or feelings emerge during these quiet periods, don't immediately judge or analyze them. Instead, ask them questions. What are you trying to tell me? What do you represent? What do you need from me? Jung discovered that the unconscious often communicates through symbols, metaphors, and emotions, rather than logical thoughts. A feeling of being trapped might represent some aspect of your life where you've given away your power. An image of a journey might symbolize a psychological transition you're avoiding. A sense of grief might indicate that you're mourning an outdated version of yourself. The key is to approach this material with what Jung called respectful curiosity, rather than immediate interpretation or dismissal. Jung's second major technique was shadow work, the conscious recognition and integration of rejected aspects of the personality. Jung discovered that you can identify your shadow by paying attention to what triggers strong emotional reactions in you, particularly judgments about other people. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." When you find yourself strongly criticizing someone for being selfish, overly emotional, irresponsible, or any other trait, Jung would suggest asking, how might this quality exist in me? How have I rejected or suppressed this aspect of human nature in myself? This doesn't mean you need to become selfish or irresponsible. It means recognizing that these human capacities exist within you and finding conscious, appropriate ways to express them. Maybe your judgment of others' selfishness reveals that you've suppressed your own healthy self-interest. Maybe your irritation with emotional people shows that you've cut yourself off from your own feeling life. Shadow work is not about becoming a different person. It's about becoming a more complete person. Jung discovered that when you integrate shadow material consciously, it often transforms into positive qualities. Suppressed anger might become healthy assertiveness. Hidden selfishness might become necessary self-care. Rejected wildness might become creative spontaneity. Jung's third practical technique was dream work. Jung kept a dream journal for most of his adult life and considered dreams to be direct communications from the unconscious. He developed specific methods for working with dream material that went far beyond simple interpretation. Jung's approach to dreams was not to decode them like puzzles, but to engage with them as living experiences. He would ask patients to return to their dreams in imagination, to dialogue with dream figures, to explore what the dream was trying to show them about their current life situation. If you begin keeping a dream journal, Jung would suggest looking for patterns over time, rather than trying to interpret individual dreams. What themes keep appearing? What figures or symbols recur? How do your dreams change as you go through different life transitions? Jung discovered that dreams often compensate for conscious attitudes. If you're too rigid in your waking life, your dreams might be chaotic. If you're avoiding difficult emotions, your dreams might be intensely emotional. If you're stuck in your head, your dreams might emphasize bodily or instinctual experiences. But perhaps Jung's most important practical insight was about the necessity of what he called voluntary suffering. Jung distinguished between unnecessary suffering, the pain we create through resistance, denial, or poor choices, and necessary suffering, the pain that comes from growth, from facing reality, from letting go of what no longer serves us. Jung realized that individuation requires voluntary suffering. It means choosing to feel the grief of outgrown relationships, rather than staying in them out of comfort. It means accepting the anxiety of uncertain transitions, rather than clinging to security that stifles your soul. It means enduring the loneliness of being authentic, rather than the false connection of playing roles. This is why Jung came to see the midlife crisis as sacred suffering. It's not suffering that should be avoided or quickly remedied. It's suffering that should be honored as the birth pangs of your authentic self. Jung wrote, "The most intense conflicts, if overcome, leave behind a sense of security and calm that is not easily disturbed." But Jung also recognized that this process cannot be undertaken in complete isolation. While solitude is essential, he emphasized the importance of what he called honest relationship, connections with people who can witness your authentic self, rather than just your persona. During his crisis years, Jung's relationship with his wife Emma and his close friendships provided crucial grounding. He needed people who could see him struggling without trying to fix him, who could accept his uncertainty without rushing to provide answers. If you're beginning your own individuation process, Jung would emphasize finding or cultivating relationships that can hold space for your authentic experience. This might mean having difficult conversations with existing relationships about who you're becoming. It might mean setting boundaries with people who pressure you to remain the same. It might mean seeking out new connections with people who are also on the path of authenticity. Jung also discovered the importance of what he called meaningful work. Not just a job that pays the bills, but engagement with activities that feel connected to your deeper purpose. This doesn't necessarily mean changing careers, though it might. It means finding ways to express your authentic self through your daily activities. During his crisis, Jung began building with his own hands a stone tower at Bollingen. This wasn't just a building project, it was what he called active imagination in stone. The physical work of creating something meaningful provided a container for his psychological transformation. Your own Bollingen Tower might be writing, art, gardening, mentoring, community service, or any activity that feels like an expression of your deeper self, rather than just another obligation. Jung believed that the afternoon of life naturally draws us toward what he called generative activities, ways of contributing to the world that will outlast our individual existence. This might involve mentoring younger people, creating something lasting, or working for causes larger than ourselves. But Jung emphasized that this generative impulse must be authentic, not just another way of building ego or seeking approval. The afternoon of life calls us to contribute from our essence, not from our image. Finally, Jung discovered that individuation leads to what he called religious experience. Not necessarily organized religion, but a personal encounter with the sacred, with meaning that transcends the personal ego. Jung wrote, "The approach to the numinous is the real therapy, and, inasmuch as you attain to the numinous experiences, you are released from the curse of pathology. This doesn't mean you need to become conventionally religious. It means recognizing that individuation ultimately connects you to something larger than your personal concerns. Whether you call it God, the self, the collective conscious, or simply the mystery of existence. The practical path Jung discovered is not easy. It requires courage, patience, and a willingness to question everything you thought you knew about yourself. But Jung's own life, and the lives of countless people who have followed his insights, prove that this path leads not to breakdown, but to breakthrough. Not to a diminished life, but to a life of greater depth, authenticity, and meaning than you might have imagined possible. So here we are, at the end of our journey through Jung's discovery. But really, this isn't an end at all. It's an invitation. An invitation to see your own restlessness, your own questioning, your own sense that something is missing. Not as problems to be solved, but as calls to be answered. Jung's story doesn't end with his crisis years. After emerging from his confrontation with the unconscious, he went on to live one of the most creative and productive periods of any thinker in history. His major works, on archetypes, the collective unconscious, psychological types, the process of individuation, all emerged from the insights he gained during those dark years between 1913 and 1919. More importantly, Jung himself became more authentically who he was meant to be. He integrated his rational mind with his mystical experiences. He honored both his role as a scientist and his calling as a healer of souls. He stopped trying to fit into other people's expectations and began living from his own center. At the age of 81, Jung reflected on his transformation. "The years when I was pursuing my inner images were the most important in my life. In them, everything essential was decided. Everything later was merely the outer classification, the scientific elaboration, and the integration into life. But the numinous beginning, which contained everything, was then." Think about what Jung is saying here. At 81, looking back on a life of extraordinary achievement and recognition, he identified his period of greatest crisis as the most important time of his entire existence. Not his successes, not his discoveries, not his acclaim, but his breakdown and rebuilding. This is the promise that Jung's life offers you, that your own crisis, your own questioning, your own sense that something needs to change, might not be the beginning of decline, but the beginning of your most authentic and meaningful years. But Jung also understood that this transformation cannot be forced or hurried. You cannot rush into the afternoon of life. You can only prepare yourself to receive it when it comes. That preparation begins with a simple but profound shift in perspective. Instead of asking, "How do I get rid of this restlessness, this dissatisfaction, this sense that something is wrong?" start asking, "What is this trying to teach me? What wants to emerge? What am I being called to become?" Jung discovered that the psyche is not random. It doesn't create crises for no reason. When your carefully constructed life begins to feel insufficient, when the persona you've built starts to feel like a prison, when you find yourself longing for something you can't even name, these are not signs of failure. They are signs of readiness. Readiness to begin the real work of becoming who you truly are. Jung spent the last decades of his life helping others navigate this transition. And what he found, again and again, was that people who had the courage to face their own unconscious, to integrate their shadow, to question their persona, didn't just survive the process, they thrived in ways they had never imagined possible. They discovered creativity they didn't know they possessed. They found depths of compassion and wisdom that surprised them. They developed a sense of purpose that was both deeply personal and connected to something larger than themselves. This is not a promise of easy transformation. Jung never offered that. What he offered was something far more valuable, the assurance that the struggle itself is meaningful, that the crisis is sacred, and that on the other side of breakdown lies a kind of wholeness that makes every moment of difficulty worthwhile. The afternoon of life is waiting for you. Not someday, when you figured everything out, when you feel ready, when the circumstances are perfect. It's waiting for you now. In your questions, in your restlessness, in that quiet voice that whispers there must be more to life than this. Jung's Red Book, that record of his journey through psychological darkness into light, remained hidden for nearly a century. But it was finally published in 2009 because Jung's family realized that his personal journey of transformation could light the way for others. Your own Red Book, your own journey into authenticity, is waiting to be written. Not in red leather, but in the choices you make each day, in your willingness to listen to your soul rather than just your ego, in your courage to become who you really are rather than who you think you should be.
But Jung also discovered something disturbing. He found that one unconscious force stands above all others in its power to control your individuation, to keep you trapped in the life's morning when the afternoon is calling. And most people never see it operating, because this force doesn't announce itself. It hides behind love, behind duty, behind the most primal relationship you ever had, your mother.
Carl Jung discovered over a century ago that most people spend their entire lives trying to fix themselves while completely missing the one relationship that programs everything else. Your mother. I need to warn you, this video will disturb you. You've tried therapy. You've read self-help books. You've worked on yourself for years, but something still feels broken inside you. Something that keeps repeating the same patterns, attracting the same problems, feeling the same emptiness. You wonder why healing feels so elusive, why you make progress, then somehow end up back where you started. Here's what no one wants to tell you. You're trying to heal a wound, while the source of that wound remains completely invisible to you. Not the woman who raised you, but the internal image of mother that lives in your unconscious mind. What Jung called the mother complex. Jung said, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. Modern neuroscience now proves he was right. Your mother's emotional patterns didn't just influence you, they literally rewired your brain before you could speak. This is what you must understand. You will never heal until you understand this about your mother, that she lives inside your psyche as an autonomous force, directing your relationships, your self-worth, and your deepest fears. Until you see how the mother complex operates in your unconscious, you will keep trying to heal symptoms while the cause remains hidden. Today, we're going to make the invisible visible. We're going to explore the 6 ways the mother complex controls your adult life. Because as Jung discovered, healing doesn't begin with understanding yourself. It begins with understanding the mother who lives within you. Jung didn't arrive at the mother complex through theory alone. He discovered it through his own psychological crisis. In 1912, when Jung was breaking away from his mentor Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, who believed that sexual drives were the primary force behind human behavior, Jung experienced what he called his Dalton, confrontation with the unconscious. During this period, he realized that the most powerful force shaping human behavior wasn't sexuality, as Freud taught, but something far more primal. The archetypal images we carry from our earliest relationships. The mother, Jung observed, is our first encounter with the divine feminine archetype. She represents not just the personal woman who raised us, but the cosmic forces of nurture, security, and belonging that every human soul craves. But here's where Jung's insight becomes revolutionary. The mother complex isn't about your actual mother. It's about the internal image of mother that lives in your psyche, an image that was formed before your rational mind could process what was happening. This internal mother becomes what Jung called an autonomous complex, a cluster of emotionally charged thoughts and behaviors that operates independently of your conscious will. It has its own agenda, its own voice, its own power over your life. And the most disturbing part, Most people spend their entire lives unconsciously serving this complex, believing they're making free choices when they're actually following an ancient script written in childhood. Jung identified that the mother complex manifests differently in each person, but it always serves the same unconscious purpose: to recreate the original mother-child dynamic, whether that dynamic was nurturing or wounding. This is why you find yourself attracted to certain types of people, why you react so strongly to criticism, why you seek approval in ways that exhaust you, why you either avoid intimacy or desperately cling to it. The mother complex is the invisible puppeteer of your emotional life. And now, modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. These patterns are encoded in your nervous system at the deepest level. Brain imaging shows that early attachment experiences create neural pathways that remain active throughout your entire life. So when Jung spoke of the mother complex, he wasn't describing a psychological theory. He was mapping the architecture of the human soul. Have you ever felt guilty for wanting something that was entirely your own? For dreaming of a life that didn't revolve around someone else's needs? Jung noticed that some of his patients couldn't make a single decision without an overwhelming sense of betrayal, as if choosing themselves meant abandoning someone they loved. He traced this back to what he called the devouring mother complex. This doesn't mean your mother was literally devouring. It means the internal mother image consumes your sense of individual identity. Jung described this as the mother who loves too much, cares too much, gives too much, until there's no space left for you to become yourself. You recognize this complex when you find yourself saying yes when you mean no, when you feel guilty for having your own opinions, when you sacrifice your dreams to keep others comfortable. The devouring mother archetype whispers, "If you truly loved me, you would never leave. You would never choose yourself over my needs." And here's the psychological trap. This complex often develops from genuine love. Your mother may have been devoted, present, caring, but unable to see where she ended and you began. Jung wrote that this type of mother complex creates what he called psychological incest. Not physical, but emotional. The child becomes the mother's emotional spouse, responsible for her happiness, her self-worth, her sense of meaning. In adulthood, this manifests as the inability to set boundaries without overwhelming guilt. You become what Jung termed the eternal child, always seeking permission, always afraid of disappointing, always carrying responsibility for others' emotional states. Modern neuroscience shows us why this pattern is so persistent. When children are repeatedly flooded with a parent's emotional needs, their nervous system learns that survival depends on hypervigilance to others' feelings, while ignoring their own. The tragedy of the devouring mother complex is that it masquerades as love. But as Jung understood, true love creates space for individuation, the process of becoming who you really are. False love devours that space. If this resonates with you, notice how often you apologize for taking up space, how often you minimize your needs, how exhausted you feel after helping others. The devouring mother complex teaches you that your worth comes from how much you can give, not from who you are. But Jung knew something profound. Healing begins when you stop feeding the complex, when you reclaim the right to exist as a separate being. Do you find yourself constantly scanning people's faces for signs of approval or rejection? Do you feel like you're always performing, always proving you're worthy of love? Jung observed patients who seemed to carry an invisible hunger, a desperate need for validation that could never quite be satisfied, no matter how much they achieved. This led him to identify the absent mother complex. The absent mother isn't necessarily physically gone. She's emotionally unavailable, present in body but absent in soul. She's the mother who was depressed, overwhelmed, distracted, or simply incapable of seeing you as a separate being with your own needs. Jung understood that children need what he called mirroring, the experience of being truly seen and reflected back with love. When this mirroring is absent, the child's psyche splits. Part of you concludes, "I must be unlovable." Another part responds, "I must become perfect to earn love." This creates what Jung termed the false self, a carefully constructed persona designed to win the approval that was missing in childhood. You become the achiever, the people pleaser, the one who never shows weakness. You learn to read rooms like a survival skill, adjusting your personality to match what others want to see. But here's the cruel irony. The more approval you receive for your false self, the more empty you feel inside. Because deep down, you know they're not loving the real you, they're loving your performance. Jung called this the provisional life, always waiting for real life to begin, always feeling like you're not quite enough as you are. The absent mother complex creates what modern psychology calls anxious attachment. You crave intimacy, but fear abandonment, so you hover in relationships, never fully trusting that love can be unconditional. Neuroscience reveals that children with emotionally absent mothers develop hyperactive stress response systems. Their nervous system remains on high alert, constantly scanning for threats to their emotional security. This is why criticism feels like death to you, why rejection sends you into emotional spiral, why you can receive 100 compliments but fixate on the one critique. The absent mother complex teaches you that love must be earned, that your authentic self is somehow deficient. But Jung knew a deeper truth. The love you're seeking from others already exists within you. The task is learning to stop performing and start being. Have you ever noticed how success feels dangerous to you? How every time you're about to achieve something meaningful, you find ways to sabotage yourself. Jung encountered patients who seemed allergic to their own power, people who would unconsciously create chaos just as their lives were falling into place. He discovered this stemmed from the suffocating mother complex. This is the mother who cannot tolerate your independence, not because she's malicious, but because your growth represents her loss. Your success makes her feel abandoned, so she unconsciously communicates that loving her means staying small. Jung observed that these mothers often use guilt as a weapon. After everything I've sacrificed for you, you're becoming someone I don't recognize. Success is changing you. The child learns a devastating equation. Growth equals betrayal. So you develop what Jung called success anxiety, the unconscious fear that achieving your potential will cost you love. You learn to dim your light to keep others comfortable. This complex creates a peculiar form of self-sabotage. You'll work incredibly hard toward a goal, then mysteriously lose motivation just before reaching it. You'll start relationships with emotionally unavailable people who can't be threatened by your success. You'll choose careers that keep you perpetually struggling, because somewhere deep in your psyche, the suffocating mother whispers, "If you become too much, I'll have to leave you." Jung understood that this complex often develops with mothers who live vicariously through their children. Your achievements become her achievements. Your failures become her failures. You're not allowed to have a separate destiny. In adulthood, you find yourself unconsciously seeking permission for your dreams. You downplay your accomplishments. You feel guilty when things go well, as if you're stealing happiness from someone more deserving. Modern neuroscience shows that children who are punished for autonomy develop neural pathways that associate independence with danger. Their brain literally learns that growth threatens survival. The suffocating mother complex teaches you that love and freedom are mutually exclusive, that you must choose between being authentic and being loved. But Jung knew something liberating. The people who truly love you will celebrate your growth, not fear it. Real love wants you to become fully yourself. The suffocating mother complex keeps you small, but your soul was made for expansion. Do you hear a voice in your head that sounds suspiciously like someone from your past? A voice that notices everything you do wrong and nothing you do right? Jung was fascinated by patients who seemed to carry an internal prosecutor, someone who could turn the smallest mistake into evidence of their fundamental unworthiness. This led him to understand the critical mother complex. The critical mother is never satisfied. Nothing you do is ever quite good enough. She points out flaws with surgical precision, often disguised as helping you improve or preparing you for the real world. Jung realized that children internalize this critical voice as a survival mechanism. If you can criticize yourself first, maybe you can avoid the pain of external criticism. If you can spot your flaws before others do, maybe you can fix them in time. But here's what Jung understood. The critical mother complex doesn't create excellence, it creates paralysis. You become afraid to try anything unless you can guarantee perfection. You procrastinate on projects because starting means risking failure. You stay in situations that make you miserable because at least they're familiar. The internal critic speaks in your mother's voice, but it's serving an ancient protective function. If I'm harsh enough on myself, maybe the world will be gentler. Jung called this anticipatory shame, punishing yourself before anyone else can. This complex creates what modern psychology recognizes as the inner critic, that relentless voice that judges every decision, questions every impulse, and finds evidence of inadequacy in every experience. You develop perfectionist tendencies, not because you love excellence, but because you're terrified of judgment. You work twice as hard as others, just to feel half as worthy. The critical mother complex teaches you that you are fundamentally flawed and must constantly prove your right to exist. Neuroscience reveals that children who grow up with chronic criticism develop hyperactive neural pathways in the brain regions associated with threat detection. Their nervous system remains perpetually braced for attack. This is why compliments feel suspicious to you, why you assume people are just being polite when they praise you, why you can accomplish something remarkable and immediately focus on what could have been better. But Jung discovered something profound. The voice of the internal critic is not your voice. It's an internalized figure that has outlived its usefulness. The critical mother complex keeps you trapped in an endless cycle of self-improvement that never leads to self-acceptance. Yet your true nature needs no improvement. It only needs recognition. Do you find yourself attracted to people who need saving? Do you feel most valuable when you're sacrificing for others, even when it drains your soul? Jung noticed certain patients who seemed addicted to suffering, not because they enjoyed pain, but because they'd learned that suffering was the only currency that bought them love. This revealed what he called the martyred mother complex. The martyred mother is the woman who sacrifices everything for her family, then uses that sacrifice as emotional leverage. She never asks for what she needs directly. Instead, she suffers visibly and expects you to notice, to feel guilty, to compensate for her unhappiness. Jung understood that children of martyred mothers learn a toxic equation. Love equals suffering. Worth equals sacrifice. If you're not giving until it hurts, you're not giving enough. You become what Jung termed the wounded healer, someone who finds meaning through rescuing others because you were never allowed to be the one who needed rescue. This complex creates a peculiar form of self-betrayal. You say yes to requests that exhaust you. You stay in relationships with people who take but never give. You feel guilty when you're happy because somewhere, someone else is suffering. The martyred mother whispers, "Good people sacrifice. Selfish people choose themselves. Which kind of person are you?" So you learn to find identity in your pain. You become the friend who always listens but never speaks. The partner who gives endlessly but never asks. The child who feels responsible for everyone's happiness but your own. Jung observed that the martyred mother complex often develops when children witness a parent's depression, addiction, or emotional instability. You learn that your role is to be the emotional caretaker, the one who holds everything together. In adulthood, you're drawn to broken people because fixing them feels like love. You confuse being needed with being valued. You mistake emotional exhaustion for virtue. Modern neuroscience shows that children who become emotional caretakers develop what's called parentification. Their nervous system learns to prioritize others' emotional states over their own, creating chronic stress and emotional dysregulation. The martyred mother complex teaches you that your needs don't matter, that love requires self-erasure, that suffering is noble. But Jung knew something revolutionary. Healthy relationships require two whole people, not one person trying to heal another's wounds. The martyred mother complex keeps you trapped in cycles of rescue and resentment. True love doesn't require martyrdom. It requires presence. Have you ever found yourself comparing every relationship to a standard that seems impossible to meet? Do you feel like no one could ever love you the way you need to be loved? Jung encountered patients who seemed to be searching for something that didn't exist in the human realm. A perfect love, a flawless connection, a relationship without conflict or disappointment. This led him to identify the idealized mother complex. The idealized mother isn't necessarily a good mother in the traditional sense. She's the mother who existed more as fantasy than reality, either because she died early, was absent, or because you needed to create a perfect image to survive an imperfect reality. Jung understood that when we can't process the complexity of our actual mother, her human flaws, her limitations, her failures, we split her into two figures: the perfect mother who exists in our imagination, and the disappointing reality that everyone else represents. This creates what Jung called the eternal search. You spend your life looking for someone who can match the idealized mother in your psyche, never realizing that this figure was never real to begin with. You become what Jung termed the romantic, someone who falls in love with potential rather than reality, who sees what people could become rather than who they are. Every relationship becomes a comparison. Every partner falls short of the impossible standards set by the idealized mother figure. You find flaws where others see humanity. You seek perfection where others find contentment. The idealized mother complex whispers, "True love would understand you completely. Real connection would require no effort. The right person would heal all your wounds." So you leave relationships just as they deepen. You create distance when intimacy becomes real. You prefer the fantasy of what could be to the reality of what is. Jung observed that this complex often develops as a defense against abandonment or trauma. If you can't rely on real relationships, you create perfect ones in your mind. But here's the psychological trap. The idealized mother complex doesn't protect you from disappointment, it guarantees it. No human being can compete with a fantasy. Modern attachment research shows that people with idealized mother complexes often struggle with what's called anxious avoidant patterns. They crave intimacy, but sabotage it when it becomes available. The idealized mother complex teaches you that love should be effortless, that real connection requires no work, that if it's not perfect, it's not worth having. But Jung knew something profound. Love isn't found in perfection. It's found in acceptance, not of ideal people, but of real ones. The idealized mother complex keeps you searching for what doesn't exist while missing what does. Now comes the most uncomfortable part of this journey. Because Jung understood something that most people resist. We don't just carry these mother complexes. We become them. The devouring mother you resented? Notice how you struggle to let others have their own opinions without feeling rejected. The absent mother who never saw you. Watch how you disappear emotionally when people need you most. The suffocating mother who feared your growth. Observe how you unconsciously discourage others from changing, growing, or succeeding beyond you. The critical mother who is never satisfied. Listen to how you speak to the people you claim to love. The martyred mother who suffered in silence. See how you use your sacrifices as emotional currency, expecting others to feel guilty for your choices. The idealized mother who existed only in fantasy. Notice how you hold others to impossible standards, then feel disappointed when they reveal their humanity. Jung called this the return of the repressed. What we don't heal within ourselves, we unconsciously inflict upon others. You become the very thing you swore you'd never be, not because you're weak or flawed, but because the complex lives in your unconscious, operating beyond your awareness. This is perhaps Jung's most revolutionary insight. We don't just suffer from our mother complexes. We perpetuate them. The pattern continues until someone has the courage to stop it. Until someone chooses consciousness over repetition. Until someone decides that the cycle ends with them. But here's what Jung knew that changes everything. Recognizing these patterns isn't about shame or blame. It's about liberation. Because the moment you can see the complex operating, you're no longer unconsciously possessed by it. The moment you can name it, you can change it. And that moment That's where your true life begins. Carl Jung spent his life mapping the hidden territories of the human psyche. And what he discovered about the mother complex remains one of his most profound contributions to understanding why we suffer and how we can heal. These 6 patterns, the devouring, absent, suffocating, critical, martyred, and idealized mother complexes, aren't psychological theories. They're living forces in your unconscious mind, shaping every relationship, every decision, every moment of self-doubt or self-love. But Jung's ultimate message wasn't despair, it was hope. He believed that consciousness was the cure for unconscious suffering, that awareness was the antidote to compulsion, that the very act of seeing these patterns robs them of their power over you. So I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, not just in your mind, but in the comments below. Which of these 6 mother complexes recognized you? Which one made you uncomfortable because it revealed something you'd been avoiding? Write it down. Make it real. Let your words be a declaration of consciousness over compulsion. Because when you name the pattern, you begin to break it. Now, if this video opened your eyes to the hidden forces controlling your relationships, you need to understand something else. Jung discovered. The mother complex is just one type of psychological territory that can trap you. Watch this video next to see Jung's map of the 6 most dangerous places your psyche goes.